Okay, so there's been a lot of controversy this week with Microsoft releasing an AI version, a full AI generated version of Quake 2. And you can actually demo it. It's quite interesting to fire it up in your browser and get this extremely low frame rate version of Quake 2, but it is entirely AI driven. There isn't a game engine there as such, as far as I'm aware. And I guess it works. There's been a lot of pushback to it. And some of the pushback I noticed on Twitter was actually there was pushback to the pushback from none other than John Carmack himself saying, whoa, hold on a minute. I actually think this is pretty cool for what it is. But Alex, have you given it a go? Because I have, and it just didn't work after after like less than 20 seconds. It just started producing very weird stuff.
I've tried it out, and I mean, I find it interesting that it can learn the generic structure of the beginning of Quake 2's level, and it doesn't start at the beginning of, Quake 2's first level, which is more geometrically complex than the latter half of the level, because you have to go down multiple sets of stairs with obscuring geometry in the way. That's very important. Mm-hmm. I wonder if that's purposeful. But I think the core issue here for me is implying that it is Quake 2. I mean, it is using Quake 2's art as the basis for this, and it's trained on videos of Quake 2 being played. So it isn't like hooking up to the raw game data here. So it's interesting that it can get like 3D facsimiles of aspects of Quake 2 there. But it isn't Quake 2. Like Quake 2 has a very set, defined amount of like health, ammo, and a level, enemy placement. All these things are very well and very purposefully made. And since this isn't recreating that aspect of it, in fact, it's constantly forgetting those aspects of it, I wouldn't even call this Quake 2. I would call this a Quake 2 visual demo, but not Quake 2. And I find that just I do find it a little bit insulting, because it's like saying video games are just like the visual aspect and not like the gameplay aspect. And that is not at all what I think about video games. So, other than that, I think it's just technically interesting that this exists, but the limitations are so extreme. Like the lack of object permanence is incredible. The lack of interactivity with enemies makes it not Quake 2, like I described earlier. You really shouldn't be like looking up and down and not seeing the world again. And I think the fact that they put out a demo that has that issue in it is strange. I thought they would maybe want to work that issue out first in the model, because right now it's kind of seeming like the one thing I've seen with these AI models is the lack of object permanence over time is like the biggest hindrance of it like being consistent over time. Yeah. And they just put out a demo that shows it off extremely. So I don't know if it's like a pure limitation that we should expect for years to come or what. But I guess it's kind of interesting, but I really wish they phrased this completely differently.
Right. Okay. It is like a sort of, it's an interactive experience based on Quake 2.
Sure.
But not Quake 2. Oliver.
Yeah, I have a bit of a more positive view. Perhaps that's not a big surprise to people, but I think about it a little more positively. First of all, I think they are training it on Quake 2 video footage, but I think it's paired with inputs critically, right? So they can mimic that. So it's trained on the inputs and the game visual data and audio data perhaps as well. But I thought this was a pretty cool demo just because of, again, I guess it depends on your point of reference, because to me, this actually seems super stable and reliable. But obviously it isn't super stable and reliable. It's horrible in a lot of respects, but relative to earlier demos that have been shown off, it's actually doing some pretty impressive stuff, I think, because it looks very much like Quake 2. You can walk around, and especially if you're like moving forward through the level and not really looking around too much, that's when you start to get tripped up. But if you're looking forward and you walk through the level, it's like, yeah, this is Quake 2, there's enemies there, this is going on, I can collide with walls and there's collision. And so I'm getting that visual feedback and it's looking kind of like roughly in line. Now, granted, I'm not as familiar with Quake 2. I've not played as many hours of it probably as Alex has, but there's, some indication here that this is actually a real Quake 2 world. Now, the problems, I found problems pretty easily just with things I knew what to do. Like if you're spinning in place, It doesn't have a good sense of object permanence, right? Like a toddler almost. So if you spin the camera, you can respawn barrels, like break a barrel, spin the camera, barrel's back there, right? That kind of issue. It can struggle with collision somewhat. Sometimes you can kind of walk through walls. Sometimes you can teleport places. Sometimes you can teleport places. Just spin the camera for like 5 seconds and you'll be somewhere totally different, or the world will have shifted around you, or the hallways, corridors, whatever, enemies that'll be totally different. So obviously that's not good. And obviously the visual quality of the demo is very low. I think it's running at 360p technically, and the frame rate is very low. It might be, I don't know, I'd be surprised if it's much above 10 frames per second. It's quite a low frame rate experience there. But I think critically, it's not really a game. Like, this is not really a game to me. And I think that this is a really cool system potentially for prototyping new game ideas. There was the Google Genie AI that was demoed a few months ago that was able to create a new playable interactive experience, a very simple one, from a prompt, right? It was able to create something that is actually playable. You could explore for a minute before it lost coherency completely. And that was kind of cool. And Microsoft's use case with this is like, maybe you could bring a game into this and prompt it with new weapons or ideas or systems or whatever, and get some kind of loosely playable result. Now, of course, this is a very low fidelity iteration of that. I don't expect this to be that product necessarily, but in the future, that could certainly be an interesting route for game developers to go down, possibly by implementing these things within kind of like this hallucinated world, and then possibly bringing that into their games. I think that's kind of an interesting angle on it. But I think the way that Microsoft is pitching it now, to me, is totally bizarre. Like Phil Spencer was mentioning, it is a tool for preservation. I can't see that at the moment. I kind of almost disagree with it conceptually, but especially when you have emulators flying around and source ports and things like this, like you could almost say, okay, well, what if those facilities aren't available, and maybe this technology develops into something really high fidelity, but in that kind of AI inflected world where that all is happening, you'd presume that the capability to develop a good emulator or a good source port would also be increased. So I don't really understand that part of it either. I also kind of have a hard time, like just the term game preservation, I don't think applies to this whole effort, where there's no logic here. It's just a hallucination of the general characteristics of a game. And so to me, that does not really double up for what the real thing is. And it can't really be, it can be game preservation in kind of a loose sense, but I don't really think it can be true game preservation. So I do think these have a role potentially in the future. I mean, I think the underlying technology is interesting. I think what they're doing with it is interesting. But in terms of this actually being like a way that you would play a version of Quake 2 preferentially over other ways to play Quake 2, and as a kind of means to preserve this game for all time, I really think that the technology is probably inappropriate for that purpose, even if it improves like a lot.
Right. Okay. Yeah. I mean, the whole game preservation thing I just find utterly bizarre because, I mean, let's say what are you preserving here? Presumably you're preserving something that you'd need to train from. And if you can train from it, then why don't you just distribute whatever it is you're training from?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it would likely be based on PC, right? Or a console version or whatever. But you've got to train it from something. You can't go to an AI. Hey, do you remember playing this game back in 1990? We can't play it now. Can you magic up a new version? That's not going to work. Maybe I'm missing something there. But the other thing, of course, is that if you do have that original source, it's a similar level of inefficiency to like the Antstream retro game streamer, where they've developed this gigantic retro streaming system and a streaming video, when the actual original games are very, very small in size with a very light CPU or potentially GPU footprint. And, you might as well just distribute the original code. And, obviously the computational cost of AI at the moment is super, super large by comparison. So, yeah, that's interesting. It kind of strikes at the heart of viability there in terms of whatever game preservation stuff they're talking about. I'd love to get a proper idea of what's being said by that, because smart people are saying it and I don't understand why they're saying it. Mm-hmm. In terms of the other stuff, I mean, yes, I mean, I played it for like a few seconds because it just stopped working, and I tried to reconnect and it didn't. So that was problematic. In terms of the stuff you're talking about, Alex, I mean, here's the thing. I mean, AI exponentially increasing in performance. So, stuff that's a problem now may not be a problem like 2 years, a year even from now. The amount of, huge leaps we've seen from AI in recent times has been quite remarkable, and I don't think that sort of curve is going to be changing anytime soon, based on the gold rush that's out there.
Right.
But at the same time, the thing about AI is that it's never a perfect solution, right? There's always going to be some problem with it, and the whole point of game systems is that you kind of have to rely on them. The amount of times that we, that games that launch with bugs get mocked, for the various outlandish things that occur. I mean, who knows what's going to happen if you have an AI game, hallucinating some weird stuff going on. Who knows what horrors await us.
Yay.
Yeah. I also just think this is sidestepping a number of important questions about game preservation, because ultimately, like, when you look at a studio like Night Dive, when they're going back to talk to rights holders about their games, they're often not talking about how difficult will this be to get running under the Kex engine. They're saying, how difficult is it going to be to reconcile all these rights holders to get us this game, right? It's a legal issue. In some cases, it's a platform issue. In some cases, maybe you need to secure some kind of deal with a platform holder. You need to secure some deal with the rights holders to get this game in your system. None of those issues go away, I don't think, if you're hallucinating this game. If you're clearly hallucinating a copyrighted work on which you've trained, I don't think those issues go away. They don't go away if you want to emulate the game, obviously, but you need to sidestep those issues. You need to find a way around those legal issues, potentially, for many of these games in order to sell them. Sometimes that means working with many different publishers, many different studios. Sometimes it means working with a mega corporation that isn't too eager to let you distribute a game that they released maybe 15 years ago. So those are other issues that just have to ultimately deal with, like, why preserving games is so difficult, right? That need to be addressed.
But Oliver, I think you've forgotten that basically AI is running roughshod over the concept of copyright. It doesn't care. It shall consume all of these works with no remorse and no legal recourse.
I think when it comes to literally replicating, like, image for image, a copyrighted work with the intent of displacing the market for that copyrighted work from the original rights holder, I suspect that's now obviously there's like this abstract notion of, well, you trained this LLM on all human knowledge and now it can kind of replicate my writing style or something. That's a different conversation than we fed it Quake 2 game data and now we're distributing Quake 2, but technically it's not running Quake 2. I don't think that flies. I don't think the US Copyright Office is going to accept that argument.
Okay, fair enough. Well, obviously things are going to be moving at a quick pace here. Interested to see what happens next.